Weird science is the revolution.
Hello, you weirdos. Jim here, and if you are not aware, I am first and foremost a DC Comics fan. I ended up starting reading DC Comics, love DC Comics, and my favorite character in all of comics is Dick Grayson, all iterations, but really Nightwing for the most part. Now, with that, I'm having a struggle. I actually am having a struggle lately of enjoying not just DC, but Marvel as well. The big two, in my mind, are struggling while they don't seem to want to admit it, and a lot of fans don't either. For me personally, it's a struggle for me to enjoy a lot of the DC and Marvel comics. And I think this kind of became a thing in my mind a couple years ago. Me and my man Eric, who do the DC Comics podcast, each year at the end of the year, we have an awards show. Most podcasts do this. You know, you have that big thing of best book, best writer, best art, all that stuff. And we used to really enjoy it. And it used to be really hard to pick winners. And then it became less and less hard. And then a couple years ago, we stopped doing it. We just stopped doing it because we couldn't come up with enough picks for the categories. And we ended up saying that since we review the comics each and every week, we can't fake the funk and suddenly say, well, we'll say we like that because it's already on record what we thought. We didn't want to end up having a winner of best book be something that we were giving 6 5s to, out of 10. And it felt weird. So we just stopped it. We stopped doing an award show because there weren't enough great books that we wanted to have fun pushing and having awards for. So with that, and since then, I started kind of dipping my toe into manga and then indie comics. And right now, and why I am having this whole video is right now I started thinking, what are my favorite comics? And I used to have a bunch of DC stuff. Oh my God, I like these 5 are my top because that's the DC stuff. I love it. Oh my God. And then even when I jumped over and started reading and reviewing Marvel stuff, of course, there's some of that. So the top 10 would never have had probably an indie comic in it. That's not true right now. Right now, and I just sat there and I wrote down, now I was going to do this and give you my top 5. I'm going to go beyond that because I wanted to go until I actually picked a big 2 comic as one of my favorites. So it is a list that includes, and I'm not going to say that these are in complete order, but these are the books as I sat there thinking, what are my favorite books right now? Redcoat, Rook Exodus, both being from the Ghost Machine deal. Duke, which ended, but I'm kind of sliding that in with the newly announced G.I. Joe book, Transformers, Conan the Barbarian, Dawn Runner, Geiger, Sacrificers, all these. And then I get to Ultimate Spider-Man, which is funny because even that is a alt-world, Elseworlds, Ultimate Universe type deal that is playing off like giving you things that Marvel isn't. So I went all that way, and I stopped there. I think I'd have to go maybe 2, 3, or 4 more before I even consider putting a DC book on the list. I don't get it, but I do get it. And what this video is going to be about is where I feel like the big 2 are failing while indies are coming through and actually excelling. And so we'll go through a couple things here. And I'm going to start with this idea of who has the better writers. The better writers, it's no doubt that indie comics have the better writers. So many of the best writers right now are doing indie books. And while that should be something where you say, well, the big 2 now should get all these fresh faces. They come in, all these people that didn't get a chance, they're going to swoop in and fill the void. And we're going to discover all these new great writers. Unfortunately, it's almost like where I used to say back in the day, it's like the Pittsburgh Pirates. You kind of cultivate these things, then they go to the Yankees. But still, the idea of having these fresh faces and whatnot, they're just not there. One of the ones that will pop into a lot of people's head probably right away is Jeremy Adams. And I have talked to Jeremy Adams, and it's been a struggle for him to even get there, which we'll go into a little bit later. But this void of big writers, like a void of a writer that you're saying, I follow them no matter what. I can't wait for a book by that person to come out because it doesn't matter who it's about, what it's about. I'm in. I don't feel like we have that as much as we used to. And for me, I really don't have it much at all. I have that pretty much with, I said, Jeremy Adams. But that's kind of it. And I'm talking the whole big two. Yeah, there's writers that I like, but I don't have that, oh my God, whatever they go on, I will read. And there's various reasons why some of the biggest writers avoid the big two. It's not any sort of mind-bending deal. A big thing that I keep seeing told whatnot is they want creative control over their characters. They want to be able to make money on those characters, and that is just not going to happen at the big two. A big two writer who's writing Batman or Spider-Man is not going to get paid if there's a Spider-Man movie, and actually gets paid if they do, even less if they should get paid. It's just crazy. But the thing is, again, where are these new writers? Where are these new hotshots that you're like, oh my God, that's an up-and-coming guy. Oh my God, this is great. There are some. I'm not going to say they're not there, but it's not like I sit there and say, oh my God, that's the next big Hall of Fame writer there. And if they're out there, they either don't want to work at the big two already, maybe for the same reasons that big writers do, or the big two really isn't looking hard enough. They don't want to pay people. They end up having that problem. So instead of grabbing, writers that have already established themselves on indie, they end up grabbing people from non-comic sources like, animation, movie writers. And when those writers come in, a lot of times you can see right away, this person either has never read a comic in their life, they don't get the idea of the pacing, the storytelling. It's very different. And it's very different from being in a writer's room with a bunch of writers where they're throwing ideas and then you kind of cobble all that together, than being the one person there and trying to write a script. A lot of times these writers over narrate. They have tons of dialogue and don't let the art tell the story with them. But everybody's different. I'm not going to say all of them are like that, but there's a lot that you just sit there and what we're doing is we're paying for them to learn on the job, and some of them just don't learn. And that goes to my next deal, which is it seems that a lot of these indie comic deals, especially, say, the Energon universe and the Ghost Machine stuff, already it feels like they have better editorial. Editorial is a big, big problem at DC and Marvel, the big two. DC is the one I know more about. I've talked to a bunch of current and past writers at DC and also some of the former editors, where most of what they tell me is the editor's job nowadays is to make sure the books come out on time. That's it. They need to make sure the books come out on time. And sometimes that leads to, oh, hey, I want to do some research I'm the writer right now. I want to do some research on this to make sure it fits. No. Just throw it out there. Just do what you want. One of the big things in a book that it boggles my mind why it exists is the Leah Williams Power Girl book. She comes over from Marvel to DC to write Power Girl, Page as it is now. And she said that when she got the job, now, when you get a job like that, you would think that the editors would come right to you and say, okay, you should read this, this, and this. This is the current continuity. If you have any problems, call me. It seemed the way that she was talking about this is she had to just decide, I'm going to read a ton of Power Girl. Came to a point because in continuity and with these companies and all this, things go on sidetracks and this way and that. She didn't really know the current continuity. And so she said, listen, I'm at a fork in the road. I need to know which way we're going now. Which way is Power Girl going to go, right or left? And they said to her, you know what? Just do your own thing. Don't worry about that. Just write what you want and do your own thing. Now, that's crazy. I actually get mad that Leah Williams seemed to be doing what she said was, and then decided just to scrap that and do what she wanted. And then you get a shitty book. You get a shitty book with characters that don't resemble anything else. And the problem is these writers, the next writer comes in and they'll only read a little bit of the last run. And then it just, it's a perpetual motion engine of awfulness is what ends up happening. And that's where we end up with characters that never feel like anything. They feel like brand new characters, and it's insane. It's insane. And what we used to have as editors, again, kind of a DC, view here, but say the Batman group editor at one point was Denny O'Neil. I mean, just think of that. Like if Denny O'Neil ends up coming to you and saying, hey, that doesn't sound like Batman, you best listen. I mean, if anybody there, and especially if you're a young writer that worked in animation, and Denny O'Neil says, no, You should do this. And that's how you develop the writers into something better. And so when I say about the better writers, not to throw shade at some guy who was in animation, because there doesn't seem to be anybody around in editorial to guide these writers. Most of the editors I see, especially at DC, weren't comic book writers. They never wrote anything. And from what I was told by a couple of current writers, is some of these editors are actually proud that they don't like comics. They never read them. They don't care about them. Again, they're almost time management people, and that's nonsense. Now, what I have heard and what people even assume at Marvel is you have some writers who have been around for a while, Nick Lowe, Tom Brevoort, but they're more just spouting out what the writers need to do and have to do instead of kind of guiding them and helping them out. And it's frustrating. It really is frustrating, but there is a reason why overall writing and continuity is a mess. It's a mess because there's no real good editorial to end up guiding these writers. And just as an example, recently, Zeb Wells, it was announced he's off of Spider-Man. They end up saying, oh, Joe Kelly's going to come in. Oh, Joe Kelly, he wrote some Spider-Man before. Most of the comments that I hear are, doesn't matter. It does not matter until you end up changing editorial. And that's a problem. To me, once editorial becomes, in the spotlight, it's like a umpire in baseball. You kind of want to go through a game not noticing the umpire. When they do something, that's when you notice and you're like, oh man, and that's editorial shouldn't be in the spotlight. And they are because of the awfulness of what we're going. But we'll go to the next one. And the next one is storytelling and characters. And I know we'll get to art. I'm not as much an art guy here, but to me, story and character are the most important aspect of a comic book. And that's where I think the indie books, especially now, especially with the Energon stuff and the Ghost Machine stuff just starting, they shine. You end up having really, really good character work, especially. And to me, that's the biggest thing. The biggest thing to me is character work, because you'll follow a character that if you love a character, you'll follow them through the ups and downs. The story may not hit as much, but you'll still follow it because you love the characters. And I don't get that anymore at the big two because, unfortunately, the characters have been around for so long. It's hard to get excited about some of these characters. Plus, most of us know that writers, they can't really do anything crazy. They're not allowed to do things. Say you're a Batman or a Spider-Man writer, you're not going to be able to do something big and exciting most of the time because it's Batman and Spider-Man. So you end up not being able to do much. And then at the end of almost every run that we get, we all expect, sometimes demand, because when you can't do something big, they end up doing really stupid small things. And I'm looking at Paul over in The Amazing Spider-Man, the worst character ever. But again, never really a character. You never worked on that character at all. He's just there to piss us all off. But at the end of runs, it makes it worse because then the writers put the toys in the toy box. They end up resetting things so that the next writer can start their BS from that point on. So again, it ends up in a lot of these big two books. It feels like it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. On the opposite side of things, indie books, because of what they are, and again, the idea of these characters being sold and not being able to do anything with them, that's just the lay of the land. That's what's happening. But indie books, fresh, exciting, basically because they are. A cliffhanger in an indie book means so much more at times than a big two book because anything can happen. A main character can die, something crazy. How many times have we seen a Batman? Oh my God, I think Batman's going to die on a cliffhanger. Everybody just rolls their eyes. And even if something big does happen to the characters, they end up making sure that it used to be that characters would have something bad and it would take a month or so or years or whatever to actually change. It just gets changed back within the issue half the time. So it just doesn't feel like it's fresh. It doesn't feel like it's exciting, or I'd use the word dangerous at points. And again, this is one of the biggest things to fix, though. These characters have been around for so long. I think that while some people will blame what I'm going to talk about as the last reason and things like that as the reason why current comics stink, I really think that the idea of, and it kind of ties into it, but the idea that these characters just don't feel fresh anymore and you can't do anything with them is a big problem. And so just as a last bit of this, just to kind of nail in the point, the idea of, say, an Amazing Spider-Man, you're like, oh man, this stinks. It's not. But you get an Ultimate Spider-Man and elsewhere, you're allowed to do things. All of a sudden, it's great. All of a sudden, you're like, oh man, they're allowed to do other things. It gets fresh. It gets exciting. It gets dangerous again. And that's what you kind of need to do. Maybe it is something from the top down that they have to decide that we're going to have to let things happen to these characters. We have to let things, be more dangerous and things like that. But I don't think they will, because these things are also big money IPs and things like that. And it's a shame, but I don't think we're going to get quite that. But maybe at DC we'll get it in the Absolute Universe, the Scott Snyder run thing. We'll have to see. Number 4, and these are 5 reasons. Number 4 is art. I'm not as much an art guy as some people, but the one thing that you get with indie books is very much varied art. There isn't a lot of house style things. Obviously, that makes sense. Different companies, different books, you have things. And again, I go and relate that to almost what I said about the characters and story. The big two don't want to take too many chances. When they do with like a Riley Rossimo, I scratch my head. But in that, it just ends up where they're not going to take a lot of chances with, the style or stuff. And you'll get a lot of books each week that you're like, okay, that's house style. I think Marvel a little more than DC. Not saying that there aren't some great artists at the big two, but you also get that mix in of, hey, kind of generic art. But the last reason why I'm down on the current big two and why I love the indie stuff is what I call the other category. I hate using catchphrases and slogans, but this does involve what people consider quote unquote woke stuff. I hate using the term. I will never use it unless I put air quotes. It's nothing I end up saying because I think it's so broad and generic. And really, at the end of this, while people will say, I want to watch the big two burn, like there'll be comments with that. I hope they end up, I don't want them to, I like Batman. I like Spider-Man. I love Nightwing. I want these. It just has to get better. So I don't like using terms and saying, because if it is going to change, you have to start talking first off with your wallet or pocketbook or whatever, purse. I don't know. But you have to make it so maybe the big two start to listen. And again, money talks. But the minute you start saying woke, you're tuned out. They're going to just think they're going to end up, boom, maybe that's their fault, but it's still a fact. So this is the thing. It's very easy to see that the big two are very agenda driven. And while a lot of people lose their mind with that, I just go with the basic idea here. If you end up throwing politics, and I mean current politics, and agendas into your books, you almost can count on losing half your audience right away. That's just how it is. And maybe more. That's just how it is in that. When I grew up, it was the big thing. You didn't talk about politics or religion, and you never asked somebody how much money they made. I think all that's out the door now, and I don't get it, because all you're doing is setting up a fight that doesn't need to be there. Now, people will argue. There's always been politics in comics. That is true. But the politics were kind of broader. They were subtler. The storytelling was better. It wasn't the book being based. The idea that you say, and people would, and I agree, that the X-Men was a metaphor for a lot of different things, a lot of agendas, a lot of groups. But the thing is, it wasn't just about that. It was fun superhero stories that was a metaphor for things, that things did come up. And one of the big things that I say to people is I don't mind comic book politics. I don't mind comic book. I don't need current. And what I say is, if you end up having problems with Madripoor or what kind of, like, that's in the comic book, that kind of comics. And yeah, you can allude to things. You can end up being subtle about it. And what I say in subtle is the idea that if you don't know or care about the politics or just want to read a fun book, it's still there. It's not like I'm going to read it and say, I don't know what they're talking about with this and that and this group and whatever. It's in the comic. You kind of know what's going on in Kahndaq. You kind of know and all that stuff. There's always been that. But when it becomes a current day agenda, you're on your soapbox and all these things and get specific, I think that that's where you lose. Like I said, you lose half or more of your deal. I'm not a real political guy, so I can end up where I get mad just in general, where I'm like, I don't need this. I see what you're doing. I don't need to do that. A lot of people use the comics for escapism. A lot of people want to get away from especially politics, agendas, and things that are kind of shoved down your throat every second of the day. But again, the way that they're going to be able to do this and kind of get away from it is just decide we're not going to do this. But at the indie stuff, you don't really have it a lot. And if you do, that's what the book is. You just avoid it. But it's not grabbing your favorite character and shoving them into a story where Batman is hugging rioters, or, you can't punch a villain. Things like that just drive me nuts, and even goes as far as some of the writers feel embarrassed to even write these heroes. They're embarrassed to write a Batman. They're embarrassed to write, all these things. And I just don't get it. I just don't get it. I think you got to go back to the basics. You got to go back to more subtle stories and really be heroic. Tell your things. And that's what I think I'm getting from almost all of the books that I am reading. And I'm looking at the list again. I mean, I'm telling you right now, like Dawn Runner, Sacrificers, they have metaphors and things in it, but it works because they're following the characters in a comic book story. And then you can kind of relate that to something else, not it being shoved down your throat. And just as a last bit, little shout out to Ram V. I think there are a lot of instances when I don't like a writer at the big two. Suddenly they go and write something indie. And I'm like, this is the greatest thing. I'm not a Ram V fan, but I am. Indie stuff. His Layla Dawn book and Dawn Runner, I think, are great. But when he's kind of pigeonholed in what he can write, it seems like he has problems. Another guy I'm not a huge fan of is Joshua Williamson. I don't like his DC stuff as much as I'd like to, but Duke right now is still I think it's my book of the year. We'll see, because it was a mini by the end, but I loved it. And so it ends up where even these writers seem excited to be able to tell new stories. And even that's a property that they go, but it seems like the inspiration and the spark is there. But I don't want to go too much into that, which probably people like you already did. But with all that, please let me know, if you're liking the indie stuff more than the big two. If you think that the big two could ever do anything to win you back. I hear a lot of people just say they're never, ever going to go back. And that's a shame, because this whole industry needs every bit of it. And you need the big two to survive and excel. And then everything else, excels as well. But with all that, let me know what you think in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do, and check the show notes or the description of the video to see all the links that you can go to, including our Patreon, patreon.com/weirdscience, where you can help us out for everything that we do here, all the podcasts we do, and get a ton of podcasts, reading groups, all these things, Marvel, DC, indie, and more over there. But that's it, and I'll talk to you all later.
You are all weirdos.
Weird science is the revolution. Weird science is the revolution.